Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. We are excited to continue our series of ACL mentorship sessions, which are aiming to answer everyone's questions on different topics that are relevant to growing as an NLP researcher. And I'm excited to be here today, joined by two other researchers from two other places. Myself, I'm Rada Mihalcea. I'm a professor of computer science at the University of Michigan. I'm also the president of the ACL, and together with several people from the ACL, including Mohit Bansal and Vinod Vidikaran, also Jijing Jin, whom you see here, and Ashkan Kazemi and Lisa Bauer, we started this mentorship series. And on each session, we are joined by other wonderful researchers. So today we are joined by Mrinmaya Sachan and Lingpeng Kong. And today's session is really about what is timely for some of you, which is applications for PhD programs. And so we are aiming to share what we know about this process and also importantly, answer your questions. And so before we get started, we have a page where you can enter your questions. I think periodically you might have to put it in the chat as people join. You can enter your questions and you can vote on questions, and we'll be picking questions from there primarily. And this is meant to be fairly informal, so feel free to also just speak up and we can just get going. All right, so as a starting point, I will invite our other panelists to talk about themselves first by means of introduction, and then also to talk a little bit about the PhD admission process, their experience with this process. What do they look for when they evaluate themselves, PhD applicants, and when they look for PhD students, and also one myth that they would want to debunk. It turns out there are various myths out there about the PhD application process. So Mrinmaya, can I start with you?
Yes. So hi everyone. First of all, thanks Rada and Jijing for organizing this. I think this is great. It's a great initiative. So I'm Mrinmaya Sachan. I'm an assistant professor in the computer science department at ETH Zürich. And before this, I was a PhD student only a couple of years ago at Carnegie Mellon. And I broadly work in natural language processing, knowledge representation, reasoning. More specifically, I'm interested in things like machine reading and thinking about reasoning problems in machine reading. So my experience with PhD admissions has been twofold. So I applied for, of course, getting into a PhD program several years ago. Before that, I also was a pre-doctoral student at IBM Research in India, so I had to make a decision whether I should apply for a PhD or stick around to get some research experience, so I can talk a little bit about that. And then now on the other side, I have been evaluating and looking at PhD applications for a couple of years. So when I look at PhD applications, there are, of course, a lot of things that come to mind, but I think the most important one is, I think, passion. So I really look for students who are interested and who are deeply passionate about what they want to do. So this is one of the most important criteria for myself. There are several others, and we can talk about those. And I think one myth that I would like to debunk, this is maybe not so much of a myth anymore, but I think a lot of PhD applicants who seek advice to me often only consider a very small set of schools to apply to. And they're often sort of famous schools in the United States and maybe from a very small list. So I would really want to also make a point that they should try to think a little bit more broadly. There are a lot of great faculty members around the world who are doing great research. So I think this is one of the things I would like to say. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Lingpeng, do you want to go next?
Hello. Hi. A lot of old friends here from CMU, so we met a lot there. Hey, okay. So yeah, my name is Lingpeng. So I also graduated from Carnegie Mellon University with my PhD. And after that, I worked in Google DeepMind in London for 3 years before I come and join the University of Hong Kong. I think this is a very interesting topic of like PhD applications. Essentially, the things that we all care about. So I think after I come to HKU, it's like a little bit interesting because like I sit on the other side of the table now. Becoming originally I was like try to optimize like how can I have applied how can I apply for a very good PhD program, but now it's like know a little bit more what's internally going around, what rumors is true, what rumors are not true. So all those things. I think probably if I can only say one sentence about that is I think work is still the most important thing. Like keep up the good work should be like universally true in terms of apply for a PhD program. Another thing is I think you do need to, I don't know, I feel like this is my intuition. It's like for some of the departments, maybe writing to a professor is not that useful because they have a hard committee something, but like I think it's in general no harm to write, especially those who are in the junior level of faculty, junior faculties. I think trying to write something to them, it's generally not harmful. So I think that should be something like I'm expecting. Yeah.
All right, thank you. On myself, I work primarily in computational social sciences, intersection with natural language processing, and also work in conversation analysis, which also intersects computational social sciences. And I work with many brilliant PhD students, also other students, undergraduate, masters, postdoctoral fellows. And I think this is one of the most rewarding things, interacting with students, and the main reasons I chose the academic path versus other alternative paths out there. And since the exposure that I had to admissions to PhD programs, aside from my own, in getting PhDs in 2 different places, and I can talk about that later. It's also at 2 different universities. I'm currently at the University of Michigan. Before I was at the University of North Texas. And it turns out that different universities have different admission processes, which can make things even more confusing for a PhD applicant. But it's also, to Mrinmaya's point of only applying to a handful of schools, I think it is worth considering casting a wide net. So considering larger number of schools as opposed to the usual suspects where everyone goes. So keep an open mind and look, for instance, where I was before, it's still me where I'm now. So it was University of North Texas. So if someone wanted to work with me, they could have worked with me just a few years ago at North Texas or now at Michigan. Turns out I'm getting many more requests now than I used to. Although, like I said, it's still the same individual. So keep an open mind and look around. And the admission process, as I said, it's different in terms, both in terms of what people look for, but also in terms of how many applicants there are. So we'll talk more about those kind of questions. I see there are several questions that were already asked around that. But specifically to the question that I brought up, what do I look for? I'm mostly looking for genuine interest in research. And also what Mrinmaya mentions, passion. So I really want to see that candid and a strong desire to grow, more so than past research experience. And that sometimes it's hard to get from a PhD application because it's only that much that one can pack in a statement of purpose and a CV. But those are the things that I'm myself looking for, that genuine interest in pursuing research path and discovery. And one of the myths that I've seen out there is people thinking that you need to have a strong research record by the time you apply. And I know that is quite stressful for many. There is that belief out there that unless you have 2 or 3 publications, you don't really have a chance. And it's true that it's getting pretty competitive in AI fields primarily, but it's not true that publications are a requirement. In fact, at least the way we evaluate in the places that I've been, we look at sort of the whole package, like everything that surrounds an applicant, which includes CV, it includes that passion for a discovery, it includes previous experiences, recommendation letters, which are important and we do pay close attention to. So it's really everything. It's not singling out like, oh, did they have a paper in ACL? Good. If not, we don't look at that. So that's not a criteria. All right. So with that, we can proceed with questions. So I see there are questions coming in a chat as well. I think we'll probably want to pick more from Slido also because people have a chance to vote. So Ben, if you don't mind entering your question in the link that Jijing posted, and we'll start picking questions from there. All right, so the first question, when professors view PhD applications, do they read every application that mentioned their name, or how many applications do they usually read out of the pool? So, Mrinmaya or Lingpeng, do one of you want to take this? And we intently try to get panelists from different parts of the world, from different possibly systems, right? So it's from Hong Kong, from Europe, from US. And so there might be different answers. So we can try to provide a complete picture to the extent possible. So whoever wants to go first.
I can say a few things here. So as I said, I was also in the US for a few years. So I was part of, for one of the years, I served as part of the admissions committee at CMU also. So I know a little bit about different systems in different countries. So I think there is no one uniform way the admission process runs in different places. So in some places, there is a admissions committee that reads all of the applicants in applications and comes up with some kind of a short list. And then those shortlisted applications are forwarded to the relevant faculty. In some other places, like for example, my school, all the applications are usually directed to me. And and it's up to me to read up all the applications and decide based on those applications, conduct interviews, etc. So yeah, so different places have sort of a different way of running the admissions. Yeah.
Lingpeng, do you want to add something from your side of the world?
I think I totally agree with that. So different schools has different systems. Like I know, for example, maybe MIT. MIT has a hire committee. Basically, like, you know, even if one professor wants to admit some student, usually he can't. You know, Stanford also, like, it has this rolling system, but like universities like UIUC or Hong Kong U, it's like the faculty members speaks, you know, it's a really big weights. So basically, like, if they want to hire some student, admit some PhD students, they do have the power to do so, in most cases. So like, this is like two different systems. So I think in my case here, so it's like, do I read every, like when I first see the question, I find it's very funny because like I almost don't read any of the applications from the system because it's really time consuming to do so. So I usually, you know, if someone apply for a position here, he will write to me. So I usually find his email, and if I find that the background looks interesting, then I will contact him, things like that. So I do look at the sum of the applications in the pool, but I think I do this like less and less these days. So that's like why I suggest you, like, if you want to apply a PhD, then it's really no harm to get contact to the potential supervisor in the future, because like we receive spams anyway. Even if you don't do this, we receive like 3 or 4, even 10 spam emails asking the PhD position every single day. So there's just no way to get rid of these things. So why not send it anyway if you are confident about this. So but do be careful, like some of the professors leave the instructions of how to send the emails there. So it's kind of a respect that you show if you follow these things, because like we all respect each other's time. Yeah, so I think that's probably the case happened here. Yeah.
Right, well, thank you. So probably I will not say more about the system that I know, because they follow similar structure in the sense of having a committee that looks at applications. So that's sort of the first hand. In our case at Michigan, that's a fairly large committee, given that we get a large number of applications. It's about 10 faculty. And then both that committee and also the name help assign applications to faculty for review. And I would say it's a panel, so it's fine to disagree, that I disagree with Lingpeng with respect to the way to go is to contact the faculty. In fact, I feel that would, at least for my case, probably that would not be very constructive. We do get a very large number of applications. I'm not sure that it will be very productive for me to also get those applications in email. I understand, like, perfect research match. And to be fair, that's what Zhijing and I connected in the first place. But there was a very close, like, I'm doing sort of the exact kind of research that you do. So that kind of match, I think it's perfectly fine to reach out to faculty. But I don't think that, at least in my case, or I would say our case at Michigan, that's not the way to identify students. We actually very carefully look at the pool of applicants, and that's sort of the first way to look at applicants. So that's the primary way to look at applicants, and its applications are looked at by a number of people in different stages by different groups of people with a short list that Mrinmaya mentioned, and then match faculty. All right, so let's move on to questions about the applicants folder. There are a couple of questions here. One is, and maybe we can do them as a group so we get to more questions. What is the first thing that you look at in the PhD applicant folder? And what are the things that are typically asked for in applications? Okay, so
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I can say something about this. So this is an interesting question. So I've not so much thought about it, what I look at first when I get an application folder. So so I imagine the answer is the CV. I look at maybe the CV first because it gives me an overall gist of what I think about this application, right? And then I also pay attention to, say, letters. I try to skim the letter of recommendations after that in order to decide how much more time I should spend on looking at other things. Yeah, so I think for me, I think the order would be I look at the CV first, and then the letters and the letter of motivation, followed by the rest of the things. Yeah.
In my case, definitely CV first, and letters probably is the second one. I mean, CV contains your GPA and your background and previous research experiences that you have been doing. Then if you have good letters, like, you know, people that I know, it's really helpful. It's really helpful. Because this actually saved me a lot of time to evaluate if this is a very good candidate. But I think this is only the first step. So basically, like, we need to talk, we need to chat, like we need to have an interview to know more about you. So this, I think, is the majority decision-making process. Like, you know, someone may have 100 papers on that CV, and like, you know, we still need to talk to him to know, like, what kind of person you are, and like what kind of things that you are interested, and your research taste, all these things. I think that's probably counts more. Yeah.
So for myself, I would look for any research experience, and that usually comes across from different places. The CV is one, and to the other question on what should we put in an application, try to include research experiences. And that really means you don't want to make a story in the CVs, right? So the CV is meant to be bullet form. But if you work on a project in an internship, rather than just giving the name of the project, maybe add one other line to highlight what was the sort of the open problem, research problem, and the solution you came up with. And again, it doesn't have to be a story, just like the 1 or 2 lines at most. But that would highlight the fact that you've been exposed to that research experience. So that's what I look for primarily, what kind of interest there is. So I don't want, and I think in AI, it's even harder these days because there is a lot of hype, to be fair. So sort of a lot of people want to do AI just because everyone else does it. And it's hard to resist that temptation. And so it's not always so straightforward to make a decision on whether this person wants to study this field because they are genuinely interested in doing research and discovering new things, or because there are all these other people who do it, and there are these big companies that are paying big money. So I'm really looking for those signals to try to unpack that. Like, is this someone who is really interested in research and interesting questions around whatever problem? It doesn't have to be a problem that I'm personally interested in. It's just to try to unpack that passion for discovering new things in NLP, because that's my field. But that will be the general signal. So CV would be one place where it comes from things that this applicant has done. Research lab, like the recommendation letters, is another place where other people talk about this person with respect to how they approach things and what kind of exposure they had, the statement of purpose. So those would be the main things that I would be focusing on. I also look, and well, between now and the deadline, it's probably not much to do. But for instance, languages that someone speaks, I'm always impressed by that. So if you do speak languages, and if there is a place to put that, I don't know, at least if they come to me, I would like to see that. And that's not necessarily research. It's more like genuine interest in language, because you care to learn one extra language other than what you learned natively, or other things like that. If you care for your community and you've done things, I care to know about that too. Like if it's someone who's engaged with the community around them. So whatever is of value to you that you care for, find the right place to put it there, and someone will read it and see it. So I think that will be maybe how to prepare for the applications. All right, so let's look at the next question. This is switching gears a little bit. What makes a good supervisor-professor lab? And I would take that this question is from the angle, when you look for labs to apply, what should you consider to be a good lab, a good supervisor to apply to? Lingpeng, do you want to start? Or, I don't know, Mrinmaya, if you, whoever wants to go first.
It's okay.
Go ahead, Lingpeng.
Okay. Talk to the students of the faculty member if you can. So I do think this is the most important thing, probably more important than which university you actually go into. So because like your advisor will be primarily the one with you for the next 5 years, hopefully. So this is truly the most important thing. I do think, like, you know, talk to the students, talk to the ones who knows this professor is the best way to get to know things about him, because like case by case, a lot of things is different. Speaking of what makes a good professor, my understanding is like an advisor should be some kind of a person that gives you helpful suggestions and be with you and give you more resources and let you to freely explore the research area that you feel interested in, and a lot of, you know, other advising stuffs that go with you. It's probably not the one who is like, you know, helping you to solve most difficult technical problems. He should be the one that in support with your interest, taste, and does not force you to do things that you don't like. So I'm not saying I'm a good advisor, but I think in my lab, the first thing is like I tell my students is like, you have to be happy, because not every PhD student is happy. And besides that, you will need to do really good research. That is the secondary thing. Yeah, that's what I want to say.
Yeah, I really second everything that Lingpeng said. I think it was very well put. So I think, yes, I agree with you on this. So I think when you're evaluating professors, look at it from different perspectives, not just sort of what they work on and how many publications or how many awards they might have, but also think about like the entire perspective of what makes a good advisor. So as an advisor has a contribution in many stages of your research career, right? So when you're starting to learn to do things versus when you're in the middle of your PhD, you might need more support. Towards when you're closer to graduation, your advisor might help you find your next job, right? So there are different stages in a PhD, and advisors have different roles. Then I think it should also be something that you should think about what kind of advisor is best for you, right? So a lot of students work with some advisors better than others. So some students really like to work with advisors who are a little bit hands-off, who'll give you guidance, but not necessarily sort of solve problems for you. But on the other hand, there are other students who are maybe slightly less experienced, who might need a more sort of a hands-on advisor who will lead them and help them start doing research, maybe. So I think there are two different perspectives, and I think I definitely encourage understanding what the advisor and the group is like, how the group internally functions, by talking to students, by talking to group members. So I think so students often know advisors better than advisors know themselves. So this is something you should do.
I guess the only thing that I would add to that, or maybe pack that, is that as faculty are evaluating you, it's just fair that you evaluate people that you would, whose lab you would consider joining. And so aside from research, which may be the first thing that you will look at, like, is there a match in their research interest with mine? I think looking at the other things, it might be hard at first to speak with students in their labs, in particular with our previous advice, cast a wide net and look at a number of schools. So maybe that's harder, but usually after you are admitted, in US at least, you get a chance to visit, or otherwise, as you narrow your choices, then that's when you really want to do a good homework of actually talking to students in the labs, and trying to have this complete picture. And then I think it's also worthwhile to look at other things that they do, and to the extent that that matters to you. Like whatever that would do, are they engaged with their community? Are they, I don't know, what do they do? And that's something that may or may not be important to you. So to the extent it is, look at those factors as well. And then what Mrinmaya mentioned, I think that's also important, style. I guess the only way to get that is by talking to other students in the lab. And then at a very high level, I think it's also a matter of seniority. I don't want to generalize, but I guess it's people who are more senior or maybe have larger labs may be a little less hands-on, and instead have a wider perspective of the field. So different types of advisors have different things to offer. So that's something else to consider. And then the other thing, and I know I feel I'm repeating myself, but the cast a wide net. I mean, there are amazing people at schools that are not under everyone's radars. Like just looking at NLP and look at people you admire and you like their research, then don't dismiss them just because they are maybe at a small school. Ultimately, as Lingpeng said, advisors matter more than schools. So consider that rather than, okay, I go to these top 10 schools, and if the people I like happen to be there, good. If not, too bad. Go the other way around. So this is sort of the list of, I don't know, 15, 20 people that I'd enjoy working with. And then they happen to be at whatever schools they are. If they ended up there and you like them, chances are you like it too. And I realize it's a hard process to sort of evaluate people without necessarily having met them. In particular, now that we don't have the in-person conferences as we used to, which limits the chances to meet people before. All right, so let's move on to the next question. So there are 3 questions that relate to how to explain research. So one question is asking for examples of work that would help in PhD admission in absence of research papers. And there is another related questions on how are papers that are under submission or work in progress viewed. And then there is also a question on how to explain research interest. So maybe we can talk about how to show research experience, including for work that there is no paper published, or maybe there is a paper that is under review but hasn't been published yet.
Yeah, I can start with that. So I think this is a good question. I think I often come across this problem where students students are sort of at the end of their master's program and have done a great piece of work, have done maybe a thesis or some research project, but don't have a publication out yet. So I think the right way to address this is to have some kind of link in your CV or an application to articles about your work. It could be your master's thesis, it could be this project, but also to engage with your letter writers and ask them to talk about it in their letters, and also talk about it in your statement of purpose, right? So one of the things that I in particular pay a lot of attention to is students' thesis projects and what they actually did and what they talk about, I think. So whether it be a bachelor's thesis or master's thesis. So I second Rada, you don't necessarily need to have a paper, but you need to have some research experience. And if you have it, I think to talk about it and provide links to articles that you have written about that piece of work, and prime your letter writers, tell your letter writers to talk about it, right? That this is great work.
Totally agree. I think first, I don't personally undervalue the ongoing work, because I think it really doesn't matter if it's ongoing work, if it's some work that hasn't been published, the paper hasn't been accepted, or accepted published work. This is totally fine. Like I don't care about that too much, but I care about what is the quality of this research project, because a lot of published papers may not be as good as the ongoing work. So it's really the quality that matters. In terms of explain your research, I think what Maria said is really, really good. I want to say two more things. I think one is I find people sometimes they explain what they do. Sometimes they explain how they solve a question. It's so complicated, the model, and complicated math, all these things. These are important, but do make a clear statement why the question is important in the first place. So I think a lot of people ignore this. So a good research should be a good question plus a good solution. So we've been mainly focusing on the solution part too much, but we sometimes don't care, about why this question is important in the first place. So make sure that people know this is an impactful question. And second is don't treat your, especially in the interview, don't treat the professor as they should have read your paper. They should know all about machine learning and research and NLP. All this. Treat them more friendly, and try to explain a little bit more careful. Don't think this is a stupid way. Don't think this makes the professor look stupid or whatever, but explain in a more gentle way, what you are doing there, the high level idea, the summarization of what you do in the work, and the low level details about what you do. So basically don't assume that the committee, the professors who's listening to your explanation knows all these things before. Yes, so this is basically my suggestion.
All right, so I can maybe Zhijing, if you wanted, you said you had a.
Yeah, thank you, Rada. So I really like Lingpeng's answer. I just want to ask a follow-up question, how do we disentangle, let's say, if some undergrad or master student do a research project, the quality of the research question and the quality of the work, maybe the quality of the work come from them, but I'm not sure where the quality of the question come from. So also when I observe in our ACL mentorship Slack, there are people asking about different research questions. They want to do this, they want to do that. I can see that maybe many of them come from their local advisors instead of their own wish. Yeah, are there any tricks to discover the quality of questions?
I think this is a really, really good question. So I think the question basically reflects your research taste. in some ways, right? So like different people may have different views of like what is an important question, what is not an important question. Different people have different views, different people have different taste. Even the project come from, you know, your advisor in the undergraduate or master program, you still have opinion on that. Right. So like, you know, can you explain why this is an important question? Do you believe this is an important question on your side? I think these things all reflect, you know, your research taste and like your ways of choosing a question. So it's not about that we need to choose the best question ever. It's about how you justify your choice and justify your research. Yes.
And I would agree with that. That I think early on, it's a little hard to form research questions in the absence of having been exposed extensively. And that comes over time. So in a way, I'm not even trying very hard to see who came up with that question. It's mostly like endorsement because they are interested in finding an answer. That's what I look for. But that's a great thing to consider. And I find generally that comes over time. It might not even come during a PhD, maybe later in the PhD, sometime even after that, to start asking the questions that you drive as opposed to people you collaborate with. And I just wanted to add one more thing to the question of how to talk about research interest and how to handle what you've done before in the sense of showing some research experience, which it turns out at least all panelists here believe that is important to show in the PhD application. I think it's useful to just step back a little bit and look at what you've done. Given that you are interested in applying for a PhD program, chances are that there is that interest in research. Is not all of a sudden from one day to the next you determine like, now I'm doing this thing. Even if it wasn't spelled out, you sort of had it in the back of your mind that there is a like research interest you. So step back and look at everything you've done. And Mrinmaya mentioned, for instance, thesis. You might have done a thesis, whether it's an undergrad thesis or it's a master thesis. So there could be honor thesis in different settings. So that is one thing. Internships, like if you've done internships, even like not many internships result in publications, but you had some research experience. So that's another place to look for in the sense of highlighting in your application. Then classes that you took, maybe they had term projects where you spend more time solving a problem. So that's another place that you could highlight. So those are things that you would sort of often do in your undergrad or master's that you can highlight. And then of course are the unpublished papers. They could be on an archive or not, but those are things that you could highlight. And then of course it's published papers, which are, I think, the fewer cases, right? I mean, it's not, like I said, an expectations, and not really that many people would have published papers by the time they apply for a PhD. So that's, I would say, mostly like the exceptional cases. Look for other things that you've done that show some research, and then really sit down and think on how to present that. And it does help to get feedback from others. So you would have your first cut because you know best what you've done, but then asking your friends or other people who apply for PhD programs before for feedback on how to best highlight that. Is that really coming across as a interesting research experience or not? And readers can give you feedback before you submit that application. All right, so we can move on. There are two questions that are more looking at things in perspective. So it's not people who necessarily apply in, my guess at least, in this application season, asking about how to prepare for an application. So what are basic requirements and preparations needed for a potential NLP PhD application. And also there was another email about how to go about having those research experiences. Like, for instance, what would be good ways to do that? Is it like through internships, or what would be other ways to get the research experience? So I will add to that, say, considering someone who is thinking to apply a year from now, or maybe 2 years from now, what should they be doing to prepare their application for a PhD?
Yeah, this is a great question. So I think there are two aspects to consider here. So one of the things that is fundamentally true is that professors usually have limited time, but despite that, I think there are a number of opportunities that one can pursue. So I think there are a number of opportunities with respect to sort of maybe master's, bachelor's thesis, but also term projects, but also course projects, right? And as faculty members, we teach classes, and as part of our classes, often we have projects, right? So you could make use of things like office hours to reach out to faculty on your projects, and you can do more on some of these projects and make them a research experience that you want to eventually talk about or write about in your application. So I think there are a number of ways you can go around this problem that students face, right? Which is having one-on-one time with faculty mentors, right? In order to prepare for applications. The other thing I would suggest is reach out to students, postdocs in your in those groups, right? Wherever you're studying at the moment, there are PhD students, hopefully, and maybe postdocs, right? So PhD students and postdocs are usually very happy to collaborate with you. They would often be happy to involve you in maybe their projects if you are an early student, right? So I think these are kind of opportunities you should look out for, right? Try to be involved in ways that that these opportunities provide you. Yeah, I can start off with that.
Lingpeng, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think 1 year before, it's still a long time. Like, and this time it's basically like your class is really important. Don't overlook that. Don't because you are learning a lot of things, and those things will be useful in the future. Like, you probably never will know how it can be useful. Like operating systems, you probably think that's not useful for NLP, but it can be useful some way in your life, in your PhD career, in an unexpected way. So it is a really good learning environment. Try to learn more things. This is very, very, very important. And also, speaking of the research experience, I think it's mostly follow your interest, follow what you really want to do. Because if you think NLP is really interesting, find local labs there and try to do something. These days, I think AI is a little bit different from what it is 10 years ago. 10 years ago, you probably will need to learn a lot of things before you can really start some kind of a research project. You have a lot of things like programming, all these things. But these days, because the deep learning thing actually gives us a lot of opportunities. Nowadays, it's not super hard for people to understand what BERT is, for example. Not super hard to implement, LSTM tagger or whatever, things like the state-of-the-art models. You can even replicate the papers, because the API, the software we have these years, it's much better than, it's much more useful than before. I think much more easy to use than before. So so I think the advice is probably don't Don't think you can do anything. Don't think you cannot do anything. Because like even the silver papers, even the bird papers, you can try to replicate them. You can try to develop ideas upon them and try to ask someone in your university, like, if this idea really works, try your ideas, try whatever you think should be useful, because the intuitions nowadays in the papers might not be so much better than yours. So try to do more things and believe in yourself in terms of research. So this is my thinking.
Yeah, I would agree with that. There are various ways to get some of that research experience. It could be in classes, like pay attention to your classes, and there might be term projects. It could be in internships in labs, and that could happen in companies, but could also happen in academic labs. And there too, it is the same thing that we mentioned previously, keep an open mind. There are sort of the usual suspects when it comes to internships, and people aim for those, like, I don't know, 2, 3, 5 companies. But research, like good research, happens in many different places. So try to keep an open mind with respect to that, like where you would apply for internship. There are nonprofits that do really cool research. There are smaller companies that do cool research. And so that could be a consideration to make. You could also consider not doing an internship and instead taking a summer to do, like, focus on some research work and work with a professor, whether at your university or somewhere else. And that would help achieve 2 things. One is to have that research experience that you could talk about, and it will also help you figure out what is that really interests you, right? So it's a little bit like in machine learning, the experiences that we have serve both as positive and negative examples, and the negative examples are as useful as the positive ones. So that would help you sort of form your research taste and understand what you really want to do. So sort of in a way, the more the better. The more such experiences you have, the better they would help you understand what you are interested in, and also at the same time form those experiences that will help you later in the application. All right, so we can move on to the next questions. There is a question about how to email and contact professors. What is the correct way? I know, Lingpeng, you are a big supporter of that. If you want to start.
I think first of all, check the professor's homepage and see, like, if there's any notes for that. So, like, some professors say there should be a title, in what ways, like, you can contact, in what ways you should contact, in what ways you shouldn't contact. So a lot of these different things, there's trying to be respectful for that first. And so I think it's like 2 cases. One is like, you're interested in my lab, you can send an email to me, of course. And the other is like, you have a specific question in my paper. That's also like a reasonable email to write. All things, I feel like I'm happy to reply these emails. I don't think there are specific rules for that. At least in my case, I try to be more open-minded, because, like, a lot of people are not quite native speakers. They're not quite following the email formats or whatever. But try to do your best, and that's probably okay enough. Yeah.
And since we only have a few minutes left, just so we go through more questions, maybe we can do like 1 answer per question.
Okay.
So we could move on to the next question on how do you decide between doing a research master's and a PhD, and do things change if you do first the master's So how to decide to make that decision? Mrinmaya, if you want to take that one.
Yeah.
Between applying for master or PhD.
Yes, that's a good question. So I think the way one has to think, one can think about this is, so one should apply for a PhD when they are ready to commit to a research endeavor for a number of years, right? I'm really a big believer of that. I think you're investing 4 or 5 years of your life in towards research. You should be willing to do that. You should be really interested in doing that. If you're in a position where you are interested but you're not so sure, and you want to understand what research is like, or you want to get some experience, I think one could consider doing a master's or doing a pre-doctoral position. I think I want to bring that up. So a lot of industry labs these days are offering these kinds of positions to undergraduate students who want to work in a research team and eventually go out and apply for PhD programs. There are some of these positions, and sometimes faculty members are also willing to take on these students who could be research assistants for some time and then apply. So I would imagine that if you believe that you're not fully prepared, you should consider applying to one of these positions. It would help you be more confident, but also it would, I would imagine, faculty members, when they read the application, would see more.
Right. There's another question on what are the opportunity costs of doing a PhD, and I can address that. There is a cost, right? Both in terms of time. It takes about 5 years. It depends on different places. It could be 3, 4, 5, 6, but it takes a fair number of years. So there is a time investment, and to some there is also financial investment, in the sense that in most places you will receive support. It does depend from school to school, so that's something to consider. At Michigan, for instance, there is guaranteed support for 5 years. Other places have other forms, but in general, you do get paid during the PhD. Now, this said, you do not get paid the same as, say, big companies would pay, right? So there is some financial cut that you take right there by going the PhD route, which pays less because you also study in the meantime, but it does pay off. And so my mindset, at least, is the investment you make, if you think that that's something you want to do, will pay off in the longer term, right? So doing a PhD will sort of put you on top of the mountain, and the view from there is much broader than you are somewhere lower, right? So there will be certain positions that will be open to you that wouldn't be otherwise. And then also in terms of speaking financial terms, you will make up what you lost financially doing your PhD afterwards, just because you'll get paid more for having that kind of training. So if you are interested in that, like in doing a PhD, if you're interested in research, then it does pay off. It is a sacrifice during those years in terms of spending time and not necessarily getting the salary that you would get elsewhere, but it will pay off. So I think it's worthwhile if you have the mindset and interest for that. So with that, maybe we can take, I don't know, any final advice from our panelists. We are at time, so we can close the session. I realize there are many questions that haven't been addressed, but please do reach out to others as well. In terms of peers are best advisors, so reach out to others who've done a PhD before or are in the PhD program or considering, and they will be able to answer your questions. Also, faculty in your circles at your university. So any final thoughts, final advice?
Yeah, I think from my side, I think we covered a good bit. I think if you're preparing for a PhD application in a few years, try to take advantage of the opportunities you have, try to reach out, not only to faculty members, but also students, and try to do things, try to accomplish things during an internship and other opportunities that you're getting. And during the application, for those who are applying this year, I would say reach out to your mentors who are your letter writers. They can help you not just by writing a letter, but also providing you guidance from time to time on how to apply, where to apply, and all of these other details. And I think shout out to Xijing's ACL Mentorship Slack. I think you should consider joining.
Any final thoughts, Lingpeng?
Only do a PhD if you really love it, not for any other reasons, because like it will be a painful process somehow, like in many difficulties in a lot of ways. So I think like just, you know, be simple, and if you love it, you do it. If you don't know if you want to do a PhD or not, that mostly in most cases means that you are not ready. So you probably can, you know, do a research master or something like that first, and to see like if you're really interested in those things, if you really love the PhD life. If you love research, that should be the reason that you go for a PhD degree, because the cost is high. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would add that the cost is high, but I would say the process is enjoyable. I've done 2 PhDs because I enjoy it so much. And so I guess to me, it's really taking that path of enjoying the ride as opposed to stressing out, looking at peers, which I know these days can be quite stressful because there are so many people interested in AI. So really just think of your own enjoyment with respect to the application itself, like thinking about what you've done. That's enjoyable, right? I mean, you put a lot of work. So looking back, connecting to faculty, I know sometimes it can be frustrating to get recommendation letters, but again, try to see the process in itself and try to go for the things that you enjoy and being candid about the things that you like. I think that really comes across in the application, interactions you have, like really being genuine with that and the beliefs that of what you really enjoy. And that also goes to Lingpeng's point. I really do this only if you think you would enjoy it, not because others do it. Because if you do it that way, because others do it, it can be painful. If you do it because you think you would enjoy it, then it should be a super fun ride. And to me, it's one of the best times in one's life because it's really a time to just be creative and pursue passions. And okay, you maybe do not get paid that well, but it's enough to sort of have a fine life and then make new connections, really being wonderful intellectual circles. So it's really enjoyable. So just go with that mindset, like this is for you and for you to enjoy, and then everything else will work out. And Xijing, do you have any sort of, sorry to put you on spot for the last one, but you are the kind host here.
Thank you, Rada. I think just be happy. And for the mentoring section now, I decide to have a half an hour get-a-town every day on the same day as the mentoring session. So if you ever want to connect to peers, feel free to join the get-a-town session. We send the link in Slack. Yeah.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thanks so much to our panelists. Thanks so much, Xijing. And thanks to everyone for being here, and good luck. Whatever stage you are in, whether you are applying this year, whether it's something that you are just considering applying in future years. Good luck to everyone with everything you do. Bye, everyone.